What's up, guys? So, I was having a conversation with the client the other day and thought that maybe this would be something to think about. And we were talking about meal timing and, how many meals per day is best to eat for health and for fat loss and all that good stuff. And they had mentioned that they were under the understanding that the whole 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, was made up by food companies and completely fabricated, and that, it doesn't really matter how many meals per day that we eat. And honestly, is some truth to that. As far as how many meals per day that we eat is more of a preference thing than it is a right or wrong answer. Outside of eating once a day, I definitely don't recommend that. Probably should eat more than 2 meals a day just for protein distribution, making sure that we're able to actually utilize all the protein that we're consuming and getting in enough adequate protein, which is really hard to do in 1 to 2 meals a day. But I would also say that it's probably true that having a specific number of meals per day is not necessary. However, how I think about the 3 meals a day is I think it's a good thing. I think it makes sense, especially from a, let's say, structure standpoint or even a self-control standpoint, because we have to remember that the day that we live in, where we have an abundance of food everywhere, is a very short span of human history. Whereas most of human history has been a fight for survival due to not having access to food and water. That was the biggest threat that we had for thousands and thousands of years, is how are we going to eat and drink today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives, and how are we going to keep ourselves alive long enough to reproduce and keep that generation alive long enough and protect them long enough so that they can reproduce, and so on and so forth. And now we live in a time where we have an abundance of food and water and drink everywhere, and we never really have to worry about that, at least the majority of us that's probably listening to this. So from a constraint standpoint and a self-control standpoint, I think it's a good option, because if you think about it, if we have no guardrails as far as how much we're consuming or how often we're consuming nutrients or food, with the overabundance that we have around us, it would be very easy to constantly eat all day long, because you constantly have access, and it doesn't cost a whole lot of money to have access at least to something to eat. And so I think it's smart to structure your eating around a certain amount of meals per day, just for the fact of the control. Because if you say, hey, I have these 3 meals or I have these 4 meals, and what I consider as meals is protein feedings, not necessarily like having, a 5-course dish with dessert. I mean, if you're getting adequate protein, 20, 30, 40 grams of protein in that sitting, I consider that a meal. So that could be like a protein shake and a piece of fruit. I would consider that as an actual meal, because you're getting the nutrients needed in the amount needed to promote good health. So saying I have 3 or these 4 meals I'm going to eat per day, this cuts out a lot of the excess snacking that happens between meals that gets a lot of people in trouble when it comes to consumption. So if I'm like, hey, I've only got these 4 meals to eat, and I have to cut it off outside of that, that's a way of time restricted eating, just like intermittent fasting is a way of time restricted eating. So it's a way that we're restricting how often or how long we're eating per day. That's essentially the same idea. So having certain meal time set and a certain amount of meals can help you stop from just consuming all throughout the day, because you have access everywhere that you go. So that's why I feel that it's a good thing. I don't really see how that would even benefit food companies anyways, for that to be created by these food companies, because people are eating way more than 3 meals typically anyways. So why would they promote less instead of saying, hey, you need 8 meals a day? And the whole notion of, you need 5 meals, 6 meals, 8 small meals a day in order to keep your metabolism firing and keep you burning calories throughout the day, that's 100% not true. Totally not true. Now, somebody, they prefer that. They get in the calories that they need per day that way, and it keeps them from getting too hungry and then end up just grabbing stuff that they don't really need to be consuming. Then it's totally fine. It can work. But for someone to think, how am I going to go from eating sporadically to eating 5 to 8 small meals per day? I don't have time to prepare that. How am I going to do that? What is that going to look like? That's not necessary, guys. So, just, it's smart if you have certain physique goals or certain health goals that are tied to your lifestyle, to have structure around your eating, to have meal time set, to have meals pre-planned. All these little ways of being prepared and having structure are a good thing. We tend to look at a lot of these things as like they're too restrictive and like, oh, I just want to live my life. Well, if we just live however, then we're going to get whatever result comes with that. But if we want to be in control of our health, if we want to consistently get better and feel better and move better, then there's certain structures that we need set in life that keeps us doing that. If we want to get in shape, if we want to get more fit, if we want to increase our endurance, if we want to improve our strength, just wanting to do it and occasionally showing up to the gym, or occasionally going for a run, or just sporadically doing certain things is probably not going to get you the results you want. But if you have a structured plan, something where you have guardrails and says, hey, I have to work out this many times per day, I have to get this many minutes of cardio in per day, I need to get this many steps in per day, you're not restricting yourself, you're setting structure around your life. So you spend less time working against yourself and more time working towards what you want to accomplish. So same thing with having meal structure. Structure in a way that works for your life, that allows you to get in the amount of calories that you need for the specific goals. So if it's fat loss, you need to be in a calorie deficit, eating less calories than you burn. If your goal is to maintain where you're at and just improve your fitness level, then you need to be eating as many calories as you burn per day. That's going to put you in maintenance. And then if you're wanting to gain muscle, adequate muscle tissue, or you're wanting to put on weight because you're underweight, then you need to be in a calorie surplus where you're eating more calories than your body is burning per day. And once you do that, how you decide to disperse that throughout your day is all about preference and sustainability. So if you don't have time to prep and eat 5 to 8 meals per day because your life's too busy, don't even plan for that, because you're setting yourself up for failure. But if you know that you heard Joe down the street say, hey, 1 to 2 meals per day is the answer, it's the best answer for health, but yet you catch yourself binging in the snack cabinet every night because you're starving, because you've limited yourself to 1 to 2 meals per day, that's not the right structure for you. Even if you're getting in all the calories you need and you're meeting your goals as far as your macros and all that, it doesn't matter if you can't sustain that. So figure out what works best for you. Figure out how many meals that looks like per day, how many snacks you may need to throw in per day that keeps you aligned with your health goals and with your macros that you need to consume. And you can't lose that way. This is also why knowing how many macros, protein, carbs, and fats, knowing how many calories you need to consume per day is so important. Again, we don't want to have to, burden ourselves with it, because it is tedious in the beginning and it takes time to learn and figure out how much you need to be consuming for what outcome that you're wanting. But when you do that, now it makes the rest of your life so much easier, because it takes out all the guessing and wondering what's working or what's not, and it says, hey, this is what I need to do, and if I do this, then it should produce this outcome, because this is calculated. And then if it doesn't produce this outcome, I can always shift and maneuver it, but the same standards are going to be in place regardless. And that's accountability, that's structure, that's discipline, and that's guardrails that keep you from doing things that are contrary to what you want to accomplish. So rather, if it's 3 meals per day, guys, 5 meals, 2 meals, 8 meals, make sure you're checking the big boxes of the things that matter, monitoring your consumption, not overdoing it in any area, getting in enough protein, and matching the calories that align with what your goal is in the final outcome, and you will be successful. All right, guys, that's all I got.